Welcome back, everybody. Any questions before we start? No questions? Question?
Some of us are not really happy with the
Yep. Yep. You can come and see me during the drop-in sessions. So we're going to have some drop-in sessions starting maybe on Friday or maybe on Wednesday, but definitely next week there will be 2 drop-in sessions. And you can have lengthy discussions about your grades. I can just tell you it's very unusual to have your grade changed. It's very, very unusual. So there's a very, very small chance, unless there's something very, very seriously that has gone wrong with your grade, it's unlikely that it will change.
Yeah, just for me personally, myself.
Yep, I know. So if you do ask questions about your grade, I can't talk about anybody else. And a lot of students will say, oh, but my friend got this grade, therefore I should get this grade. Or something like that. Or my friend got a higher grade than me, and I'm unhappy about that. I get that a lot. But what your friend gets as a grade does not factor into your grade.
Okay, so I'm not really comparing my friend's grades to mine. So for instance, like you give us some video samples, like from previous coursework or from previous years. So which served as a benchmark to what the expectation was. So some people did their video which was quite better, but in the grading section they were like, the person who graded their work, I think it was Sonia, was like, their video wasn't professional. But I've seen this video and seen what you give us as a benchmark. What they did was much better, but at the end of the day they were told that it wasn't professional. So I'm not saying that they had better grades than they did, but I feel like they were not being fairly treated in terms of how they were.
Yeah, we could discuss it during the drop-in sessions. Yeah. Yep. I've had many lengthy conversations about grades during the drop-in sessions. Yeah. I've had drop-in sessions that last 4 hours with student questions. Yeah, but I can tell you it's very unusual that a grade changes. Probably like maybe 5% of the time a grade will change, so you have like a 1 in 20 chance roughly of changing your grade. It's very small chance. And that's usually if there are errors, there are like serious errors. It can happen that there are errors with the coursework scores. That can happen. But I double check all of them. So if anybody asks a question, I always double check them. But it only happens about 5% of the time that I change or find an error. Yeah. Another question?
So coursework 3 is sort of supposed to build on the skills from coursework 1. And in terms of the feedback that some of us got, it was, oh, like you described the implementation, but it could have been improved, but it didn't really tell us how it could be improved. So is it possible, like, say if some of us agreed for our videos to be shown, that you'd be able to like, go through and maybe point out where the improvements can be made, so that we can build on that for coursework 3?
Yes, I can offer that. Not only that, I can offer that service before you submit. So if you had come and seen me, a lot of students saw me before they submitted their coursework, and I told them how they could improve the various aspects. Yep. Another question?
Literally, that was going to be my point, that like the feedback isn't exactly helpful because it just says, oh, you've done this, but you could have done better. There's no like how or why, or like you said, like she said, coursework 1 is really linked to coursework 3. So if I don't know exactly what I'm improving, how am I supposed to do better?
You can talk about that during the drop-in sessions. During the drop-in sessions, I can give you very detailed feedback on what could be improved or how it could be improved, like what's not clear. Yeah.
Is that also something that could maybe be done within like a lecture or a workshop, or would it just be within the drop-in sessions that you'd be able to offer that?
We do a lot of exercises in the workshops that are related to the coursework. So all of the workshops are related to the courseworks, and they're all preparation for the courseworks. So if you take the workshops seriously, then it will help you in your coursework scores and your submissions. So now to have a workshop where you say create a 2-minute video, is going to be very difficult to do.
No, not so much the ask. And I mean, you can say this is what you want as well, but for you to just go through some examples of our submissions, and if you need our prior consent, then we can obviously give that. And say like where the improvements could have been made.
So we had a workshop exactly on this. We did this exact what you're just describing, where everybody forms a group and they summarize the research paper according to the template. Then they submit their summary on a Google Doc, and then I go through and say what is good, what could be improved, and so on. So we did exactly this in one of the workshops. We did summarize a research paper. Does anybody remember that workshop? Yeah. So that was one of the workshops. Any other questions? Okay. So I'm looking forward to the drop-in sessions. I can see a lot of people have questions and want to discuss their courseworks, which is exactly why we have the drop-in sessions. So I'm looking forward to that. Any other questions? I can also say that the scores for coursework 1 were quite normal. Let's say that the median is a 65. Which is exactly where it's supposed to be. The median is supposed to be a 65. That's the university recommendations, university guidelines. There's a normal distribution of grades, just the way it's supposed to be. So this is the way the university expects us to grade. They want a normal distribution centered on 65. And that's exactly what we have for this coursework 1. So that's something else to consider. Okay, let's talk about citing research, everybody's favorite topic. How to avoid plagiarism could be another name for this lecture. So basically we want to make sure we understand how to cite previous literature. And we can cite previous literature using quotations, using a summary, citing diagrams, software libraries, technologies. We also talk a little bit about when you don't need citations, how to put a citation in your bibliography, and avoiding plagiarism using proper referencing. So this is a big topic, right? This is a big topic at every educational institution across the universe. So what is plagiarism? Here are some different definitions of plagiarism. There are quite a lot. The ways that you can plagiarize has expanded. So plagiarism is getting more and more complicated with time. So someone submitting someone else's work as your own, including AI, right? AI is someone else's work. So if you submit AI work as your own, that's plagiarism. Copying words or ideas without giving credit for your sources. Forgetting quote marks around quotations. So some people will use quotations and forget the quotes. Lying about the source of a quotation. This includes AI, by the way, and hallucination. You may have noticed during our workshops that AI sometimes would lie about their sources, and that's called hallucination. Copying and slightly editing someone else's text could be considered plagiarism. Copying paragraphs or programs from a textbook or a web page. Copying another person's work either with or without their knowledge. Working together in groups of 2 or more to produce a single program or essay, and then each member of the group submitting a copy of this as their own work. That's also called collusion. Getting someone else to do some or all of your work and then submitting it as your own work. There are lots of paid services, right? You can pay somebody to do your coursework, but that fits under the definition of plagiarism. I would be interested to know, what those if anybody has succeeded. Obviously, nobody can tell me with that, but. And there's a university webpage about this topic. Why use references? The importance of accurate references in your work. What are references, and so on. There's a short video about this, guidelines on referencing other work, academic misconduct, plagiarism, and so on. So you can supplement anything we discuss here with the university web pages on the same topic. Here's the University of Nottingham's definition: representing another person's work or ideas as one's own. For example, by failing to correctly acknowledge others' ideas or work as sources of information in an assignment and neglecting use of quotation marks. This also applies to use of graphical material, calculations, and that plagiarism is not limited to text-based sources. Right, and then there's some more information about that. Okay, looks like similar, same web page. By the way, if there are any questions or comments about this, feel free to interject. Why is this such a big topic, and why do we use citations? So there are a few different reasons for responsibility, proprietary, and professionalism. Right? It is socially and morally responsible to give people credit for their ideas. This might be backed up formally by intellectual property laws. That's what intellectual property laws are for. Things like copyrights, so your ideas can't be stolen. For accuracy, by giving a direct quotation, we can ensure that an original writer's words are not misinterpreted or distorted. So accuracy plays a role in using citations. And by citing where ideas come from, either through direct or indirect quotation, we can make the history of a topic clear and who made which arguments. I can say that this third reason applies to me quite a lot. One of the reasons I personally like citations is because I often like to follow up on a given topic to learn more about a given topic. So citations enable a reader or an observer to follow up on a quotation or a summary or some sort of evidence. Right? Somebody might provide some evidence, and I want to look into that evidence more deeply. So I can use the citation to follow up on the original book or paper to find out more details. This is what's probably very relevant for this audience. For students to provide clear evidence of which ideas are their own and which are from elsewhere. So that's going to be one of the most important reasons for students in this class. Another reason is to put your own work into context. In other words, you demonstrate that you've done your homework or your research or your background reading on a given topic, so you know who's explored your topic already and what has been done in this area. Right? This is all about coursework 3. So it is important to put your work into context of scientific and technical research literature and current technologies. Right? You want to find out, given a problem or a question or a hypothesis, what work has been done on this already. And that's what we're talking about by creating context for your work. Context can mean demonstrating that your idea is new, providing evidence that your approach is promising, contrasting what you've done with previous work, or comparing what you've done with previous work, quantitatively or descriptively, providing a reader with the ability to find out more about a given technique and explaining where a data set came from. So we had a lecture, hopefully some people can remember, about how to find papers, research papers. We had a special, that was a workshop actually, not a lecture. Now we explain in practice how to quote from, summarize, and cite those papers in your work. So this is really about the literature review. So one ways you can cite previous work is through direct quotations. I think most people are familiar with this. Is there anybody that hasn't seen this already or is not familiar with this? I think to make it this far in the educational system, you probably have come across this. A direct quotation needs 4 components: the content, like a quote, the quotation marks, an in-text citation directly after the quoted words, and then a full reference in the bibliography. I think everybody's familiar with that, right? I don't need to go into that in too much detail. There are some short examples of direct quotations. Right, there's the actual quote, there are quote marks, there's the citations, and then there'll be a reference in the bibliography. Sometimes longer quotations are put into a block quotation where the text is indented. So this is an example of a block quotation. And to be on the safe side, the block quotations should also have quotes around them, actually. So those are different quotations. You might not need to quote directly, right, if you don't want to, right? Summarizing the previous work or someone else's work is usually a requirement, especially in courseworks 1 and 3. So if you summarize someone else's ideas, you still include the citation and that the full reference is in the bibliography. So that's a quote with a citation, and this is a summary with the citation. Summary of the same thing. So you might be wondering, when would you like to quote directly and when would you like to use a summary? So I think definitions, when you use definitions, it's very good to quote directly, to include a whole sentence or sentences, whole definitions, and just quote them directly. So if you want to give an accurate definition, use quotes. If the language is very specialized and precise, you might also want to use it in quotes. And if the content uses specialized language that cannot easily be translated or converted into different words, that's also a good time to use quotes. And here's an example of using direct quotes that fits this case scenario of special words and special meaning that are difficult to summarize. I see a lot of errors with people using figures from other sources and images from other sources. I see this error a lot. Not citing where your image comes from. This is a very common error, and I'm sure I will see this error sometimes in coursework 3. So if you use an image from somewhere else, it needs to be cited. Right? This is an image from somewhere else, and there's the citation. And it even says how the image is created, which is quite good. You also cite software libraries, so when you use software libraries, you also include citations to those. There are some common citations to common websites and libraries that people use, right? When do you not need a citation? Well, as a rule of thumb, you can include a citation to be on the safe side, but you might not need a citation for common knowledge. So something that is common knowledge or generally accepted does not require a citation, and that depends on your audience. So for computer science, you might not need a citation to the Python programming language. That's an example, right? You don't, if you just use the phrase Python programming language, you don't need a citation. If it's something that the audience knows uncontroversially, like smoking is bad for your health, then you don't need a citation for that either. By the way, there is one rule of thumb for when you do need a citation. Does anybody know any rules of thumb for when you do need a citation? Has anybody learned anything like that in school or before this lecture? Anybody have any rules of thumb for when you do need a citation? Besides the case of using quotes or summarizing some other source. Did anybody do this in school? When do you need a citation?
Say you use a paper that summarizes another paper, and then you use that summary, then there's a different way that you're supposed to do that.
That's probably a good time to cite a source. Anybody do general rules of thumb from school, from high school, for example? I did. So when I was in high school, one of the rules was every time you see a number, and that's a good rule. So every time you use a number, you need a citation. So you can say something like, I don't know, the storage capacity of an iPhone was, 16 gigabytes in 2015, or something like that. So there's two numbers in there, and you need a citation to back up those numbers. That's a very good rule of thumb. I use that all the time. So anytime you use numbers, you need a citation. Very specialized vocabulary is usually an indication of needing a citation as well. I still remember being in high school, and of course in high school you write a lot of essays. I don't know if you guys did that, but in my high school we wrote a lot of essays. And I remember my first year of high school, my history teacher made fun of me because I didn't use the citation. I used the phrase flying buttress in an essay about like Gothic architecture or something like that. I don't remember what it was about. But he said, Bob, like, obviously you need a citation for a flying buttress. Like, that's a very specialized term. So very specialized terms and very specialized vocabulary are necessary. But yeah, I remember those rules of thumb from high school. I think I went to a pretty good high school, actually. Yeah. Okay. You don't need a citation over and over again if you're continuing to discuss the same idea over multiple paragraphs, although it doesn't do a harm. If your idea is inspired by another source, then cite that source. Here are some examples of citations in action. So here's a citation, and there's the bibliography. Everything that is cited in text must be in a bibliography, right? And vice versa. Everything that's in the bibliography needs to be cited as well. So you don't want to have just random references in your bibliography. And these are two very common styles for citations. There are many different styles for references and citations. That's beyond the scope of this lecture, and it's not terribly important. But you can use the so-called Harvard citation style if you're wondering which style to use. And this is what the Harvard citation style looks like. This is the information you need when you cite a conference paper. So there will, in coursework 3, your completeness of references are assessed. And there will be some coursework 3 submissions that get points off for incomplete references. I can almost guarantee it. So make sure your references are complete. That's what a complete conference reference looks like. It has authors, a year, a title, a conference name, a publisher, pages, and a date, location, DOI. So that's an example. Same for journal, similar for journal papers. Your journal paper citations need to be complete. Right, that's an example of a journal. It has author names, a year it's published, the title of the article, the title of the journal, a volume, and an issue. Anybody know what the volume corresponds to, by the way? What this volume means for a journal? Nobody knows what that means? Because nobody's ever looked into that before?
Version? Which version is it?
Which version? Did journals have multiple versions?
That's what it seems to be.
Would it be called version instead if it corresponded to the version? Instead of, why would they choose the word volume instead of version? Another answer?
Is it because back when like journals used to be like printed and read, a volume would be like the big chunky book that contained the issues?
I don't know about that. It corresponds to the year. So if a volume is let's say 10, that means it's the 10th year that journal has been running. Yeah. So the number of years the journal has been running. Issue refers to if the journal publishes multiple times per year. Usually journals publish more than once per year, like 4 times per year. So issue will be like the first publication that year, the second publication, the third or the fourth. Typically like January, April, July, and November or something like that. That's what the issue is. Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah, I'm glad we're going over this, if you didn't know it already. Book chapters require author's year, title, publisher, ISBN or DOIs. These are some examples of book chapters being cited. This is another one. It's good to include either pages of a book or individual. Well, I think pages are helpful. They're not absolutely critical, but certainly the individual chapter titles are important. So this is the authors, the year, the chapter title, and then the name of the book here. And then the pages and the ISBN and so on. Okay, and then for web pages, you cite web pages too, right? The web pages have a title, and they usually have either an author or an affiliation associated with them. So an affiliation meaning like the name of a company or the name of an institution, a university, so on. The URL itself, and then the last access date. The last access date, does anybody know what that is? The last access date? Anyone know what that is?
Last time I looked through the article.
Yeah, the last time you looked at the web page, basically, just to verify that it still exists, right? Because web pages are not as persistent as, say, printed media. Okay, and then you generally use some tool to keep track of your references or to build up a list of references. You can keep a so-called database of references in a bibliography format. You can use a bibliographical system, bibliographical system to auto-generate in-text citations and references. EndNote is a popular tool. BibTeX is a popular tool. And in coursework 3, you'll be using a tool called Surveys for collecting your references. So just some tips to keep in mind to avoid plagiarism. These are some tips I learned from high school. So I'm still using my high school knowledge all the way to this day. So don't use more than 3 words in a row from another source if you want to avoid plagiarism. This is a kind of rule of thumb. Right? If you're using 3 words or more in a row from another source, anybody know what you're supposed to do in this case if you're using 3 words or more in a row from another source? Quote it. That's right. So you're either quoting it or not quoting it, and then using less than 3 words from another source. If that makes any sense. If you need more than 3 words in a row, then use quotes. If you're wondering, okay, how do I do this in reality? A good method to summarize text in reality without plagiarizing is to read that text you need to summarize. Maybe read 1 paragraph. Right, just read it. See if you can understand it. Then close the page and write your summary in your own words. And that's a good strategy to avoid plagiarism. Yeah. So read a paragraph, put it away or look away, then summarize from short-term memory using your own words. You are allowed to use software to improve your grammar, right? If you're not a native English speaker, which a lot of people aren't, you can use software like Grammarly to improve your grammar. That's okay. Another tip is you'll never get penalized for extra citations. So if you're not sure, you can just include the citation, right, if you're not sure. That's a rule of thumb I use all the time. If I'm not sure, and you can ask, if you're not sure about if you need you need a citation or not, you can ask. You can ask during the drop-in sessions, after lectures, or in the chat of the research methods team. You can just ask. Right? That's another rule of thumb. And by the way, can anybody think of a good benefit to citations? I'm looking at this rule number 4. Can anybody think of a nice benefit of citations?
It shows you've done them well.
Exactly. It makes you look smarter. It makes you look smarter. The more citations you have, the smarter you look. There's a famous professor called Ben Schneiderman who's good at writing books. And I've seen him give talks, and he, at the end of his lectures, which are very good, he's very skilled at lecturing. I asked him, I said, how do you manage your time? Because he's written a number of books. I said something like, the last time I saw you at a lecture, it was for a different book. And here I am again, watching you, present another book. And I was like, where do you find the time? And he didn't really answer the question, but he said something like, it was a lot of work, it's really difficult. And then he said, there are over 1,000 citations in that book. And it's true, he's really, really smart. He's he's one of the smartest people that's alive today. So if you want to look smart, he looks smart and he is smart at the same time. And he uses a lot of citations. I don't know if you guys have ever picked up books with hundreds or thousands of citations in them, but it's really, really, for an academic, it's very impressive to pick up. I have some books in my office that have hundreds and thousands of citations in them, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, how did they do this? How did they synthesize or process all this literature? But it makes the author look smart. And that's true about anybody. It just makes you look smart. Okay, and there is a lot of discussion about AI, right, and the use of AI in the context of plagiarism and so on. This is from the university webpage. The University of Nottingham currently equates the use of AI tools with plagiarism unless explicit permission for their use has been granted by a student, school, or department. Unauthorized or unacknowledged use of ChatGPT to generate content for assignments will therefore be considered plagiarism and will carry penalties. Yes, so there's a summary here. There's also a presentation. The university has released a presentation on this topic, and there it is, slides 1 through 15. We will not go through this because it would be too painfully boring. However, what could you use? Everybody's obsessed now with LLMs. It's like an obsession, right? Just give me my LLM. I need my LLM. I'm obsessed. what could you use LLMs for? Can anybody think of a good use case scenario? A good use case scenario for LLMs is if you're not a native speaker, you can write a sentence yourself, put it into an LLM and say, please identify the errors or fix the grammar in this sentence, and then get the result back. So you can use an LLM for that, to fix the language, fix the mistakes in the language that you've written yourself. But yeah, this is a tricky area. The submission of work that is generated in or improved by unpermitted language model software for the purpose of gaining marks will be regarded as false authorship and seen as an attempt to gain an unpermitted academic advantage. For clarity, this includes the over-reliance on translation and paraphrasing software, for example, Grammarly, including when it is used to conceal the original author or source material. Anyways, I use Grammarly. So when I type a sentence, I will look for any software that says, hey, you have an error here. Could be like a missing comma or something like that, or a word that's got the wrong case or the wrong order of words. So everybody uses those tools. I use those tools. And they can be very helpful. Cutting and pasting is a very common source of plagiarism errors, cutting and pasting. I wonder, cutting and pasting is a nice invention, right? There was a time in history, you guys don't know about this, but there was a time in human history where cutting and pasting did not exist. Like, it just didn't exist. That's an invention. That's a man-made invention, cutting and pasting. And it's an interesting invention, right? Because we all cut and paste text pretty regularly. And probably on a daily basis, actually. And as a useless side note, I have wondered often, like, how much text in the world is the result of cutting and pasting. I think a huge percentage of the world's text comes from cutting and pasting. Anyways, be careful with cutting and pasting and don't let it be a source of plagiarism. Another completely useless story. When I was a grad student writing my master's degree, at that time I was also an employee. So I was writing a master's degree, but I was also employed at the university. So I had this dual role of student and teacher at the same time. But that role, because I was staff, I was given access to the copying machine and the printing machine in the main office of the computer science department, which is a great privilege, right? When you get like free copies, free printing, like that's a great asset to have. Anyways, I remember going in there to make, I don't remember why, but I went into to make some copies, I guess, or to print something out, this big machine. And you're never going to believe me, but you don't have to believe me. I wouldn't believe me either if I didn't see it with my own eyes. But I saw a professor of computer science with a pair of scissors cutting out like things from pieces of paper and then literally pasting them onto another piece of paper. Like the literal old-fashioned copying and pasting. The literal with paper and paste onto a new piece of paper. I was very, very impressed. Very impressed. Okay, so any questions about citations and plagiarism? I hope that you knew that material already, but we have to cover it just to make sure and like check all the boxes and make sure that you know this material if you didn't already know it. Any questions about citations and plagiarism? Okay, there is a module evaluation. This is just a time to mention that. If you look on Moodle, you'll see a module evaluation. Also, I mentioned that I think it would be great if you stayed in touch. So if you want to stay in touch, just find me on LinkedIn and send me a connection request. I like to stay in touch with students. I like to see what happens to them after they graduate. And I am in touch with a lot of students that have graduated already. And sometimes, it doesn't happen very often, but once a year or maybe something like that, I will invite a student to come and give a talk at the university. So you can find some examples of that on my YouTube channel, actually. And let me just see if that module evaluation, it should be there. There it is, student evaluation of the module survey. Okay, any questions? Question?
What reference manager do you use?
I use BibTech for my references, my reference manager. It's not very exciting. I also use a tool called Overleaf. Have you heard of Overleaf? So I use the Overleaf combined with BibTech as my references. But I also use just plain old Google Docs to keep lists of references. So both of those. It's not very exciting. Any other questions? Okay, if you're happy, you can go. You're free to go. And if you're unhappy, you can come and talk to me until you're happy. Yeah.